Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson, and it's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Cecil Staton. Welcome, Cecil.
Dr. Robinson.
Cecil, our relationship goes back a long time, and you're a gentleman of many attributes, much knowledge, a PhD from Oxford, an observer of world affairs, and among other things. So with that introduction, which is limited as it is, but we touched a few bases. Maybe we could discuss some of the events that are transforming our country right now. President Trump is in the White House, and he's making one change after another. And probably one of the most formidable changes he's undertaken is to change our national policy with tariffs. And there are major tariff increases are appearing. There's a lot of fear and loathing in the world international order, I would say. A lot of concern. The stock market has dropped substantially. Many people are worried about their jobs, worried about their businesses. And I'll sort of set the situation up for you to hit back. I'll throw you the football. But apparently the idea is that the U.S. is losing money on its tariff arrangements, so that our tariff numbers, the amount of money we receive when imports come into our country, is small compared to the money that's extracted by other governments when our imports arrive there. And so President Trump's idea is to massively increase our tariffs to rectify the situation. And a lot of things have happened already. Reciprocal tariffs are coming, and this is really quite a vexing process as to how all this is going to happen. The authority to do this has been obtained by saying there is an ability for the president in emergency circumstances to independently alter tariffs. And so President Trump has seized that power with a great asperity. He's done that. And a question that now appears is, I think I've mentioned this before on this show, is how much money is really involved here, and what is the damage situation going to be to our economy. So I think, as I understand this, and this has not clearly been stated, but the taxpayers would get about $100 billion if the taxes went up. So we would receive, allegedly, $100 billion would come into our tin cups. However, the way this money comes in is that some of it comes in as a tax on people that consume Chinese toys or, I don't know, French champagne. They're going to wind up paying some of the money, and some of that money will happen when other countries drop to handle the tariffs. They'll get less profit. So other countries will get presumably pay some of this money, and they're also doing the same thing to us. So if we export subject things to other countries, the same thing will happen. And so the question is, that seems to be what's going on. So far, the damage to the stock market has been about $5 trillion, or about 50 times the perceived benefit. I'll start by saying that. Now, I will now ask I've sort of tilted the story against these tariffs, but maybe you have another opinion on this, and what do you think about it?
Well, first of all, I think with President Trump, you have to begin with an understanding that he considers himself to be quite the deal maker. And so there is a lot of give and take in his conversations and in his planning and in his threats regarding tariffs. So what you may assume is going to happen on Thursday, by Monday,
yes.
Something totally different occurs.
Yes.
So I think it's been very difficult for markets to really get a firm grasp on what is actually going to take place. Now, maybe some of that is solidifying just a bit as we speak, as he is now talking about obviously parity in tariffs with countries that maybe impose a higher tariff on us than we do on them. So I think some of it, I am hopeful, may yet work itself out. I think you're quite correct. There's been an incredible amount of damage worldwide in the stock markets, just the toying with this, just the ideas and the threats and the back and forth. And obviously other governments are not taking all of this lying down. They're imposing their own reciprocal tariffs and so forth. So some of that's going to have to work itself out. I think the only thing I would say, and I'm hopeful because I do believe this is behind some of the planning, some of the theories, some of what they think they're doing with the tariffs. I do hope that some of this will in fact take place, and that is the tariffs will gently nudge in some cases and maybe more forcefully nudge in others the potential for manufacturing of certain segments of products that are important to our economy, that those would return to the United States. Now, some of that takes a lot of time. You don't build plants, car plants, you can't build them in a month or 6 months, in some cases not even in a year or 2 years. So some of this has a much longer perspective than what we see immediately transpiring in the stock market. And it'll be hard to know the impact in the near term. But I do believe President Trump's theory is that he firmly believes we have gone too far in abandoning manufacturing in our country. We've gone too far in being reliant upon China and other countries for very important things. I mean, some of it in the military sphere, apparently, we can't produce things that we're even selling to other countries when it comes to military hardware. It's made in China, or components of it are made in China. So if we ever were in a situation where those things were absolutely necessary and China wanted to cut us off, they could probably do that. So there's certain things like that. Our pharmaceuticals, and you would probably know far more about that than I do, but a lot of, I think, pharmaceuticals are made in China as opposed to our own country. So there's a theory there, whether not everyone will be as concerned about it as obviously President Trump and those surrounding him are, but I believe they think it is in the best interest of the country that this manufacturing apparatus, as much as practicable, returns to the United States, and that he would tout already evidence of certain companies coming forward. Apple, for example, the Taiwan Semiconductor Company. There have been numerous other examples, even in the last few weeks, where executives have made their trips to the White House to say, we're going to make an investment of $500 million, or whatever the figure is, $500 billion, I think in the case of the semiconductor industry, to build plants in the United States. So I think it is a complicated thing, and I agree in an ideal world, free trade is probably a better thing to aspire to, but in reality, I think President Trump would probably say that we are so far removed from free trade today, and the advantage from the United States to other countries is such that he feels like this is an important part of his economic policy to revive the American economy. And particularly, I think they would say, Joe Sam, as I've followed this, place more emphasis on the private sector in the United States over the public sector, as this goes right along with what he's been doing in cutting waste through DOGE or whatever Elon Musk is doing, cutting waste in government. The economy in the United States has been too much dependent upon growth in federal government, not enough dependent upon the private sector, upon industry, upon manufacturing. And this is a part of a grand plan to shift away from the growth of government and the growth of government as it relates to employment and our overall economy more back to the private sector. Now, there are lots of things that are going to push back against that. There will be lots of obstacles. The courts are even involved. But whether or not, we can see today where all of this is going to ultimately end, I'm not quite confident.
Well, it's quite a conundrum as to how as these events unfold is what the ultimate outcome will be. I will say a few things. I think the money involved is not a lot of money as far as these things go. We want to get that $100 billion. Well, actually, the incredible effort to do that is quite disruptive in many ways. So I think that's one of the things to say. This is the amount of money we want to get. Not the people are ripping us off. Not this, not that. Not that the Canadian milk is whatever they do here. Or the, I don't know, chinchillas or whatever else that comes in from Latin America, whatever the deal is, we're just being ripped off and destroyed by, or maple syrup from the Quebecois sent maple syrup. They have a monopoly on that. Well, so whatever. We have all these things, but they're actually quite de minimis. These, you mentioned some bigger issues, but actually the number, getting this $100 billion back is really a quite small number, and that's never talked about. Tell us some numbers. Let's get some numbers. We're going to do this. What are the numbers? And let's forget saying we're ripped off, whatever. I mean, we can produce these numbers. So we're ripped off. Well, apparently, if we probe the story, a lot of these were treaties where there were treaties involved, and I think with Canada, they sacrificed something, we sacrificed something, and there was some good and bad in the deal. It's also extremely difficult to get ideas about trade balances, as it turns out, or tariffs. So very hard to get tariff numbers. But as far as I can tell, at least from my reading on the subject, is that basically the tariff interchange between the U.S. And Canada, there's not really any tariffs of consequence between the two countries because there's a North American free trade arrangement. So there's really not much in the way of any tariffs going back and forth between those two countries. With Mexico, supposedly, there's supposed to be a similar arrangement, but actually, the Mexicans have imposed tariffs on us. So that's a nip that you could say, well, maybe that's not fair. And you could say there are certain countries that have, for many reasons, have a favorable tariff arrangement with the U.S. One of them formerly was South Africa. So we allowed all products from South Africa to enter the country without any tariff. And on contrary-wise, anything we sent to South Africa, there were large tariffs there. So there are things like that around the world. Probably the most major, I guess, money disruption is with China. That's the big dog in this arrangement. So China exports huge amounts of products for us, and we send very little to them. And their tariffs are somewhat against ours. And in the past, there was an effort to rectify that. And so now we're getting into a tit-for-tat arrangement. But having said that, the big thing, the 800-pound gorilla on this subject is the trade imbalances. Now, I mentioned the tariffs are really relatively little. Trade imbalances are another matter.
Yeah.
So there are tremendous trade imbalances with other countries. And there could be some reasons for that, and it's quite, this is complicated, the balance of payment arrangements. So is that what Trump is pursuing? And that, to me, I would like a better explanation.
Sure.
I don't like it when the president says, well, they're ripping us off, and I'm going to make Canada the 51st state, or I'm sending the Georgia National Guard is going to take Montreal. They had trouble in the Revolutionary War or whatever. Couldn't quite do it. We'll see if we can do it now. Benedict Arnold was unsuccessful. Maybe Georgia National Guard can do it. Well, all these threats, all this posturing, I think the tariff issue is not such a big deal. The balance of trade is, and so the U.S. has a tremendous balance of trade problem.
Yes.
If that's the issue, let's discuss that. So the idea is I want to stop I want to stop imports from coming in around the world. That's really my policy. It's not being ripped off. It's the trade imbalance. So I want to make sure that the things are even Steven. So if we send $10, we import $10 from China, they take $10 of ours. Now, it's complicated, in my opinion, because one of the issues out there is mentioned by Adam Smith in his famous 1776 book, The Wealth of Nations, is comparative advantage. So what can the U.S. do and what can other countries do? Well, in general, we export a lot of our manual jobs to other countries where labor is very inexpensive, and also all of the arrangements we have to prevent pollution or environmental degradation is very rigid here, not so in other places. So, okay, you're going to put a huge, I don't know, pollution factory somewhere, and we would never allow that here, but you can produce things very inexpensively. So one of the things going on is there's an enormous subsidy that the U.S. Consumer receives from this balance of trade situation. And this kind of discussion doesn't appear to me to be taking place, at least with pundits on the subject, too much. I don't know. Maybe it does. A balance of trade issue, what are we going to do about it? And one of the things that happens is there's consumers in the U.S. have a tremendous advantage because of this imbalance of trade. And so what happens is that there's nothing they want from us. Things are too expensive. There are no jobs here. The jobs are all in China, shall we say, producing, I don't know, tennis shoes. They're coming over, they're going back and forth, and these are very inexpensive tennis shoes. If we attempted to produce these tennis shoes, it'd be more expensive. So one of the things going on is, okay, the jobs are coming back here, factories are going to come here, but firstly, it's very expensive to start something, and secondly, it's going to be, the costs are going to be greater. So what's happening now, the other story in this drama, is that we have these tremendous amount of jobs that are exported overseas, and we're getting back cheaper tennis shoes. Now, if we change that apparatus, that's going to be an extremely disruptive arrangement. And one reason is that when the Chinese get our money, what do they do with it? And around the world, they generally buy U.S. bonds. There's a trade, a triangular trade, if you want to say. The money comes back. We send them money. We actually print the money. We call up and we've got 10,000 tennis shoes here. They don't want anything else except our dollar bills. Nothing we can sell them. They make it themselves. They want our dollar bills. We send them dollar bills, and then they buy bonds, and we have the reserve currency, so it keeps things rolling. Well, that's some of the complexities out there. And one of the things that I don't think has appropriately been considered by President Trump, if I can say that, is he maybe says many good things, but I question him severely about what's going on with the trade arrangements. So this may disturb our role as a reserve currency. So that would have a catastrophic event. So if right now everybody is, we've made the world our enemy. Canada, our buddies up in Canada, who pass through Macon, Georgia on the way to Disneyland or whatever routinely, we wave at them on the highway. You see many Quebecois or Ontario type people driving, or many everywhere in Canada. Very just our allies, our friends for decades, centuries. And now there's a relationship has been injured. The same is taking place with Europe, Western Europe. The French socialists wants the Statue of Liberty back. Give that back. And the ability, leadership in the world, all of those things have been eroded by the way this has been handled. And is this the right way to handle this? There's a World Trade Organization. There are different ways to do this. The treaties could be altered. And so one of the things going on with President Trump right now, I would question whether this is the right policy. I would not question that, this is a fair statement, that the extraordinary debt the government is running up, its necessity of getting money from overseas to pay for it, is we're really headed for an enormous collision that is probably going to require some substantial cutbacks in government spending and indeed a drop in the standard of living. As this crisis works itself out, maybe what President Trump is doing is right now dropping the standard of living, wisely you could say, so that in future decades, a worse crisis will not happen. Well, that's a little comment about that. Would you like to bounce the basketball?
It's complicated, I think, as you have suggested. And I do think with President Trump, a lot of times we hear the bluster. But I think President Trump is effective. In fact, I would even say he's probably a master of communication and marketing with average Americans. I think these are complicated issues that the average person simply doesn't really understand or comprehend because they don't have the time. That's not something they're invested in. They have more important things to do on a daily basis than worry about world trade and tariffs.
The Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And the implications of these things upon the future of our country. But I think President Trump is on to some of the major, the perhaps more significant issues that you raised. I agree with you. The amount of money on the tariff may not, for all the tariffs, may at the end of the day, the juice may not be worth the squeeze, as they say. However, I think the other issues, and you touched on some of them, are far more complicated and far more important for the challenges our country faces at the moment. You mentioned, for example, that we export a lot of our jobs overseas where they can be done more cheaply. Maybe our regulations make it more difficult to do some of the things that can be done easily and less expensively in China or other countries throughout Asia. But the reality is, from my perspective, we're living in a country today where a growing and significant segment of our population lives off the government.
Yes. They
don't do anything productive. We have a huge number of people within our country who are addicted to drugs or who have other kinds of issues and problems, and they are not productive in any significant way within our economy. And so I would argue that maybe over time, us outsourcing all of these things to other countries, I mean, one of the negative aspects of it is that there is a huge portion of our population today that does not have a way to be productive and perhaps fulfilled in the way that having something in your life that you're committed to and you're involved in and you're creating, that maybe that brings to you. Some would say that's an oversimplification. I'm confident, but I really do believe it's a factor for our country, and I don't know how we begin to pull back away from that when we have deficits now in our country approaching in excess of $30 trillion.
Yes.
And we do owe that money, at least a significant portion of it, to China.
Yes.
And those who hold the government debt that
Yes.
you referenced a few moments ago. So it's a complicated thing. And I would like to think, based on what I have heard him say, if you get past the bluster and if you listen to his surrogates who are out there every week on talking heads on all of our television shows, when you hear them, that he is, some of this is a part of his overall goal to redirect the economy of this country away from where it has grown over the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, and that is government jobs, government spending money on people who don't have jobs, a growing segment of our population, government growing, all the things we've just gone through with this USAID, with DOGE, all the fraud that apparently has been taking place, the volume of people in Washington who are on the government dime, and many of them, they don't even know if they come to work or not on a daily basis in empty office buildings across Washington, D.C. and Virginia. I mean, I do think we have to do something, and I applaud President Trump for at least attempting to call out this problem for what it is, because I don't think it's sustainable for us to continue growing this debt by the trillions of dollars a year and not looking at the root causes of all of this within our economy and where our failures are and where our needs are and what we're going to do to turn that around. So again, I hope that some of this in terms of the tariffs will ultimately work itself out as he and his administration work with other countries. There are some places where I think it's a legitimate problem. You pointed that out. The trade imbalances are significant in many places. But I do not think the road we're on, as difficult as the tariff journey may be, I don't think the road we're on is sustainable either.
Well, those are good points. I might make one or two comments. Point number one is we have to look at the 350 million people that live here. And so diversity has been touted. There are many different opinions, different cohorts of people that have all kinds of different ideas, and they're all sort of all pinned up here, the 350 million people. And there are all kinds of different work ethos, different cultural nuances, and how you make that work is complicated. And one of the things that I think the government over the decades has attempted to do is income redistribution. So there's a lot of money in the country, and there are tremendous numbers of people that were they dependent on the money they could earn, they would have a very difficult time of it for many reasons. One of them is there might not be a job because of minimum wages. So what are you going to do? I can pay you 50 cents an hour. I'm not going to do that. I can get this. I can get that. So the country has become somewhat addicted to that, and there's an argument to say it's like a social insurance policy. It's kind of the way Otto von Bismarck stole the thunder from the Social Democrats by putting in the world's first Social Security. The Germans did it. Otto with his empire of blood and iron, his mustache, his little spiked helmet. Well, all right, I'll cool everything out by letting people have Social Security, and the government will look after you the same way your lord or barons did in the past. So, okay, well, all right. That's very tranquilizing for people to do that. So if you look at the whole complicated situation, that would be one thing that one might wish to see. So I'm not depending on the government. I'm going to get the job myself. I'll cut the neighbor's grass. I will deliver newspapers. I'll sell lemonade on the street. Whatever the deal is, I'll go down and hang outside somebody's office until they and sort of beg for work, kind of, on and on. Well, that's the ethos of an earlier generation. Now, would people routinely do that now? I think there'd be a lot of difficulty in doing that. And there are many reasons for that. Number one is the family breakdown, the illegitimacy rate in the country, all kinds of root things that mean that American character was not what it was when Norman Lincoln Rockwell painted his pictures, the great pictures of this rather bucolic, wonderful America. Well, if Trump is attempting to go back there, it's a very circuitous, difficult road, I would say that. Now, Cecil, I'll let you have the last comment here.
Well, I would agree. It would be very difficult to think we're going to go back to the 1950s and reestablish the order perhaps that was in the country at that particular moment in time. I do think, however, we have to do something about where we are now, and we cannot continue the slippery slope to what I think would take our country to a point where perhaps there isn't a recovery. And we are not the country that all of us, I think, would like for the United States to be in the world. Are these the right things to do? I think they're important conversations, and I think we have to do something. I think the thing you mentioned about the family is also incredibly important. It's certainly a factor, the breakdown in the family in our country, which I would argue the government has been complicit in, alongside with many other factors. I think we have to try to begin to do something to prevent us from going completely off the cliff. And I think we're very close to the cliff. And I basically want to applaud President Trump for at least recognizing we have to do something different. And whereas we have all of these people in our country who are dependent upon that government check every month for their sustenance, meager though it may be, what is so discouraging to me is what has been discovered in the last few months about a whole apparatus within our country to fund special interests and to pay huge salaries to people of one political persuasion through the non-governmental organizations that were receiving this aid and doing things funneled through the Congress, funneled through appropriations. It's just very discouraging. So I hope we can do something. If we don't do something, I wonder where we're going to be if we have another 10 or 20 years of where we are today.
Well, thank you, Cecil, for your erudite comments, and we'll have another conversation.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here
Thank
for
you.
this. Okay, well, we want to do